Kona block of the month. Number 8 for August is what they're saying to us. Now I have a lot of great things to show you in this one. For example, this whole quilt is made entirely out of half squares and squares. That's it. However, we are going to explore several options. So I'm going to be doing a test block out of this to show you what this looks like in these pieces. And so let's get into it, and I'm going to break apart the pieces for you, how I'm going to make my decisions. Now in this one, this is made entirely out of the 12-inch block. I want to show you about making a sample block first, and I'm going to talk to you about how I go about picking what my sample blocks are and how I work through those pieces. And when I have a project that I've finished up previously, or our sample maker at the store has finished up, we get the fabrics back, and usually they come back to us where they are parts and pieces. Now this one, I'm not sure what this fabric was left in my office for, but this is how I work with everything that I have that's left over personally, as well as things that are left over from making samples. Now all of our quilts that we have in the store, when we kit them, our sample maker works directly out of a kit that was cut oftentimes according to the instructions, the yardages that the designer set that up as. And the reason we do that is we recognize that many of you are going to be converting them over to AccuQuilt or to other methods of working. However, if a person just buys the kit and gets the pattern and follows the pattern's instructions, we want to honor what the designer set up in that. So unless we've changed it, in which case we will rewrite the pattern just as you've seen with AccuQuilt. Now if you notice here, with AccuQuilt, with the Kona block of the month, this piece is bigger than these pieces, so I'm going to take these out. And the reason I like to do it this way is then I can go ahead and I can look at this display of all the colors. And so when I open this up, that's what I'm looking at. Now the other thing that I'll do is when I'm done ironing it, I'm going to roll it up, and so I know exactly, these are the colors that are in there, and it keeps it from me having to re-iron it. So I want to show you as I'm trying to decide which fabrics I'm going to work with to make my sample block for this one. And so I'm going to show you some of the other choices so you can see how I work with these. This is one that I've done. I did the Eloise fabric, and in this one you can see after our samples were made, Betty Jo had made there were several little pieces. She has even tiny little pieces in here. I don't typically save fabric that's that little personally. However, if you are the person who saves them, then you want to do that. The other one is that in here she has several of the blocks that she made, and I don't know if she made too many or how that worked, but all those pieces are factored in there. And I think the other thing that I noticed, she doesn't usually save them when they get this little, but this Eloise fabric is just so stinking cute that I'm sure that that's what she was thinking about. She didn't want to throw any piece over and or away. And I want to say to you, don't feel bad if you think that way. This is a way to keep it so it's all together, so you can use it and putting it all together. So I'm going to go ahead and roll that one up. I like to roll these and these are kept in a basket. I have a bigger basket where I keep these projects because you've seen me unrolling them and showing you how we work with it. This is out of a quilt that we did for a recent Mystery Monday with parallelograms. And here are some of the leftover pieces, and we've got those rolled up. You can see how easy this is. I could make, I could open this up and make a tote bag or even like a smaller quilt. And then this one is out of a kit that we had done, a bicycle panel, and we used a kitchen table quilting pattern to go with it. I love all those blues and yellows. Now, when I start working with samples, one of the features that I have to be mindful of is it's very rare for me to have a lot of background fabric in there. So if I said, for this one, for example, if I chose this fabric and I chose this yellow as a background, I kind of have to think forward and look at it and say, will I need a lot of this? Well, as you can see for this one, I have a sizable amount. So that would be a good candidate for showing you the pieces. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and roll that one back up. And then this one was a recent Mystery Monday for Hidden Stars. This was my overcuts that I cut a lot of overcuts on, and clearly when I unroll this one, it talks to me and it says, hey, This deserves to be something else because I have a lot of 3.5-inch squares and 5-inch squares that are going to be able to work into something else. So these will not work for this, but that's how I keep them. And what I do is I just put these in one oversized basket. You can actually decorate with your fabrics. Did you know that? So with these guys, if they were in a basket sticking up with as these rolls of fabric, they would be just as pretty as if I decorated my living room with candles. And so a really lovely piece to work with. This one is a very, very complicated section. I'm planning on cutting this one up into 2.5-inch strips. I'm going to be taking a class with Sherry, and I'm going to be cutting all of this up into a jelly roll rug, and I am really pumped about it, especially since recently I started working with the scrappy binding die from AccuQuilt, so all these little pieces are going to factor into that too. So anything that was in this color blue keeps getting added to this collection. Now, one of the things too, when I have a collection like this, I tend to like blues and taupes, and they're not always easy to find where they work together. So when you're evaluating your fabric and saying I've got too much fabric or I have too many of these pieces, you want to be kind to yourself, because sometimes it comes out of a time of need where you can't figure out, you're worried about not being able to find those favorite fabrics. So, talk nice to yourself and be a little bit kinder to yourself on these things. There's some of my parallelograms that I was working on. This one's like a monster, so I need to be doing some cutting, but look at how pretty those look. So let's get over to doing some cutting. A little bit of cutting, and I want to show you I chose this fabric collection to work from, and this is one that I did this beautiful quilt from that we put together for a fat quarter collection, and so these were the scraps that I had left over. I went through, and as you look at the pattern, everything that's in the pattern that is out of your solids is just a half square triangle. So these were cut with a 3.5-inch strip, and then cut into half square triangles. And so all I did was I just went through anything that was this size, and I just put them on my 3-inch finished half square triangle in my 12-inch cube. Now know that that's also in a 6-inch cube. However, there's only a couple that are in each, the 6 and the 12, that are repeat, and you're going to use them. They're ones that you use a lot. Now as you look at the pattern has you putting this whole center section into half square triangles. So I chose this fabric as my light background, and I want to show you what happens when I do that. And it will work, and keep in mind that the original quilt out of this was made using solids, entirely out of solids. Most of you chose not to make your quilt out of solid fabrics. You chose a batik, or you chose something that was a little bit unusual. So this is what's going to happen when I sew these together, and if I sew them into that bigger unit. Now we're going to talk about the reason that they do this is they calculated everything off of this out of units that were measurable, easy to figure out, and really didn't require you to figure out things like square on point. So I want to show you a couple of revelations in there, and you can see, you probably already can see, that that piece is, you're already seeing what, because you've been working with this enough, you now see that those two half square triangles could have also been 2 quarter squares. So we would have 2 flying geese bottom to bottom. And if you're following this along the way I'm thinking that you're following along, many of you have done wallpaper once in a while, and the disturbing thing about this is my pattern gets interrupted. And so I look at this to see what else is this piece. Well, technically this is a square on point, which you also have in AccuQuilt, and also I've put the measurement in there for you. And if you notice what happens with this, I've got this 4 3/4 inch square. Now let's talk about this piece. Generally, the way you see square on point, and I'm going to square it up here this way because for some of us that orientation can disturb us a little bit. Here's what I like about using this big piece. It preserves all the integrity of that design. But now here's how typically this would be written, is that this would have been cut as a 6.5-inch square These would have been 3.5-inch cut squares and folded over to make this unit to keep it a whole piece. That's another beautiful thing to using specialty rulers and the Kona block of the month. Now, when you look at these middle pieces in here, what we have going on, this block is just 2 units. So it's this bow tie unit, which is 2 half-square triangle units put together with 2 squares, and lo and behold, it's there. So you have, this is a 9 patch. You have 5 of them that are that unit and 4 that are the square on point. Now, as I went through and cut these out, I realized I did not have enough fabric to do this unit, and so I didn't have enough to get all my pieces in, even though I had all these pieces cut, because I have a lot of pieces to fit in there. So I went back to my fabric that I had in this little collection, the leftovers, and I went ahead and I pulled out this little butterfly piece because I need 4 of these units. Now look what, it was interesting to me because I thought that this one having the flowers disrupted was going to really bother me, and it didn't bother me as much, but look at how beautiful this looks with this piece in there. And so you can see with the squares that I have in there, those butterflies are going to look just beautiful. So that's my one block. My other block that I'm putting into this is built out in this way. So it's just half square triangles put together with their half square friends and with squares in opposing corners. This exercise that I went through in putting these units together as a test sew out was a really good exercise for me to explore, to see how important this background is. But look at how beautiful that's going to be together. So we're going to head over to sewing, but before we do that, we're going to cut out as well. We're going to sew together this block, and then we're going to come back and we're going to cut out of our original Kona fabric. Now, while we're here, let's look at the Kona fabrics that we have. This is a beautiful colors. This is like everything red to pink, and it's just gorgeous, and we even have a little bit of a peach in there, and it's really a beautiful line. So I'm excited to work with this piece to be able to cut them out of the units, and then my batiks is the background there. So let's head on over to stitch this out. So I recently had a birthday and treated myself to a brand new machine, and I want to talk to you in this first lesson. It's my first piecing with it, and about stitch plates. So I'm going to show you, this machine comes with 3 stitch plates, a 5.5 millimeter, 0 millimeter, a straight stitch plate, and a 9 millimeter stitch plate. And I love the way this is articulated because it gives me a great chance to show you the differences. So the stitch plate you see in front of you, this is the 9 millimeter. This is for those of us that do a lot of decorative stitches that are that wider stitch. Now as a quilter, when you're quilting, what you want to do is you want to control how much fabric is going down in that hole. And you can see that big oval is going to be pushing a lot of fabric down there. So we want to take the machine back to something that works better. So 9 millimeters is the biggest on most machines. This stitch plate that you see next to it is a straight stitch plate. And as you can see, it has a small hole towards the front there, and that's where the needle is going to go into. That means that I'm not shoving so much fabric down into the bobbin case, and it also causes less distortion. This is why you'll hear people talk a lot of times about liking older Singer sewing machines, because that's all they had was a straight stitch plate. Now I've lined up all 3 plates that come with this machine. On the left I've got a 9 millimeter. In the middle I've got a 5.5 millimeter. Most machines come with a 5.5 millimeter opening, but even that is too wide when you're talking about piecing. And that is why I recommend contact us. We're happy to help you get a straight stitch plate for your machine, and it'll give you a better stitch quality at all times. Now, as we're looking at the setup of the machine, I have my straight stitch plate on my machine, and you can see where that is going to line up directly with the needles. And so as I'm going at this, what I want to be looking at is that we're going to be looking next at, as you put your presser foot on, you want to find your perfect 1/4 inch. And so let's talk presser feet. On this presser foot that I have on the machine, this is a 1/4 inch foot. And a 1/4 inch foot should be an accurate 1/4 inch. In fact, I want you to stop sewing things with a scant 1/4 inch, because a scant 1/4 inch does not set you up for success. you are cutting more accurately with the methods we're using, and you want to sew as accurately as possible. Therefore, in this scenario that I'm showing you on this machine, the 1/4 inch, if you can see real close there, there's a hash mark in front of the feed dogs. That hash mark is slightly to the left of the center of the feed dog. That's because the hash mark and the side of the foot on this particular machine is an accurate 1/4 inch. Your feed dogs are a metric. So we do not want to try to mess this up. So let's look in close. This is what the foot looks like if you were looking at the bottom. You can see that center where the needle is. That's the positioning. There is a little chop on the side of the foot, and that shows exactly where the needle is. There's a little mark, a V, in front of that, and that's a 1/4 inch in front of the needle. And there's a V behind it, and that's a 1/4 inch behind the needle. This is the number 97 foot I have on this, and you can see where your 1/4 inch marks are. Now, if you need a 1/8 of an inch mark, you can see it's on the inside toe. And those are the accurate markings. If you are using a machine that can get through multiple layers of fabric, you're not going to be hesitating and bumping it over, but you want to make sure we're focusing on an accurate 1/4 inch. Again, why we're putting a straight stitch plate on our machine, why we're using an accurate 1/4 inch. Knock the verbiage out about scant 1/4 inch. It's not such a thing. So why do people talk about scant 1/4 inches? That is because in a large reason for a while people were using thread that was very thick and very dense, like a 3-ply. Many of you are using a 2-ply 50 weight, 40 weight thread. So you're using a thread that isn't a big yarn. So you'd have to use a scant 1/4 inch to go over that. The other one is that what I just explained to you about where an accurate English 1/4 inch is on a sewing machine, not all sewing machines are engineered that way. So that's why we're always looking for that perfect 1/4 inch. And I want you to get more confident with it. I want you to be able to, you don't have to stand up in front of a quilt guild and say scant 1/4 inches don't exist, but at least say to yourself that I want to be sewing more accurately. So let's now look at stitch quality and stitch length. And so I've got a piece here in front of you that I'm showing you where that fits on there. So let's look at lining that fabric up accurately on our sewing machine. And you can see the way that I have that set up underneath the foot, it's so that I can see that fabric right along the edge there. There's a hash mark out in front of the stitch plate that shows my 1/4 inch. That's how I want to be working when I'm working with an accurate 1/4 inch. Now, you're not going to hit it 100% every single time, but you're going to hit it better than hoping it's the right measurement. And that's what we want to focus on. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to talk to you about stitch length. And that's kind of an important topic because we all have a tendency to make friends with our seam rippers. So on this first example that I'm showing you, I stitched this with the standard 2.5 millimeters. And when I stitch at that length, that brings that stitch out to about 10 stitches per inch, which is fine, but I don't necessarily need it to be that close. On most machines, it's 0.25 or 2.5, depending on which measurement. And that's appropriate for garments. What I did here was I lengthened it out to about, on my machine, probably like 2.6. And this one took it down to 9 stitches per inch. And that's kind of what I found. If I took it up to 2.7, then it took it down to about 8 stitches per inch. And that's what I like to have for when I am piecing something that is not terribly close, not paper piecing, and that's how I'm going to work with that. So let's get to stitching. So the first thing I'm going to do is take one of my square-on points, and I am using my point-to-point turner to put a crease, a horizontal and a vertical crease on that square. And that is because I want to line up my square-on point triangles so that the point of the triangle is on that line and I know that they're centered. Because as you can see, whether I'm using AccuQuilt or I'm using my specialty rulers, those corners are not going to be real helpful for me. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to send through some of the rest of this. All of my other half square triangles are going to be made, and I have a whole stack of my backgrounds over there, so I can just work through my stack and run these through as enders and leaders in between working on those square on point pieces. So as I'm heading into the machine, I am using my stiletto to run it in, and you can see I'm right along that 1/4 inch. And like I said, I've moved over to a different machine. Typically, I don't do a lot of piecing on a wide feed dogs like on my 9mm machine. I prefer my 5.5, but this new machine for me is pretty amazing. It performs really well, and on this one I'm seam ripping because I didn't like where I had picked up one of my Kona salads and put it onto this fabric. And so you can see what I did in there is I pulled out about every 5th stitch, and I turn it over to the back, and I just pull up that thread, and voila, she's all seam ripped out. That takes me less than a minute to unsew that. Make sure you're working with that good Clover seam ripper. We have a new version of it that has a handle that's more ergonomically friendly. I like the one that they have, but a lot of people are enjoying this new one. So I'm going back in here, and I like to almost make it a game for myself to see how infrequently can I avoid cutting my thread in between things. Now, a lot of times people call enders and leaders, they used to call them thread savers because people believe that they save the thread from having long tails on there. And what I'm doing here is I'm setting up another one of my square on points, friends, and I'm putting those X's on there, those horizontal lines. I don't really call them a thread saver. I call them saving me from having to clean off the back of my quilt. And so when I'm working this way and I'm chain piecing and setting in there, on the machine that I'm on, I have a freehand system and I can raise that up. Now I've chain pieced some pieces together, and I have one of my new favorite tools, and this is a fabric chain piece cutter. It's I'm not sure what the official name of it is, but I'm sure I'll put it in the email to you. And I go and cut those off, and those are old blades from my cutters, from my Olfa cutters that I had. And so I put them in there, and they're great at cutting those in between. Now I'm going to line up my second triangle onto the opposite side. So when I do square on point, I do one side, then I do the side that's across the way from it. And that's how I work consistently on these pieces. When I work that way, especially using AccuQuilt, and I go to line up my number 3 and 4 triangles on there, they fit in those corners perfectly. So I like doing the opposing pieces. But as you can see, as I'm working on this block, I'm going through the block piece by piece. I'm sticking some of those half square triangles in between, working on my square on point units. And I keep working this way consistently. It's important for creatives to work this way. And I believe this very firmly because I think that we have given distractibility a really bad rap. We are often distracted because we are creatives. Our brain is going so much faster than most people's are because we have a tendency to see, well, maybe I could have put an orange one here, or maybe I could have put a green one there. I wonder how much gold I have in there. There is nothing wrong with that. I've spent too much of my life telling myself that I wish I could just settle down. No, this is how you are wired. It's a gift, and you just need to accept it, and you need to celebrate it in other people, especially people younger than you. You remember how tough it was to be somebody who you kept trying to sit still, but your brain wouldn't shut down? I'm giving you permission now to say, it's okay, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm wired that way. I would bet most of you are also solution makers, and those are great skills. So I've pulled out that thread cutter. I kind of like this little gizmo. It's just, I love that it uses up my old rotary blades. I keep those in a jar, intending on discarding them in a safe way. I was able to go out and put it into this piece. This is a really handy little tool. And so as you can see now that I have them stacked up, what I'm doing is as I go in here, I cut them apart. I actually take my point-to-point turner and I do the pressing at this point. When I talk to you about being a creative, it's really boring to do the same thing over and over again. That's sometimes why we have a tendency to get up and get lost and go do something else or go look to see if anything new grew in the refrigerator this week. Honor yourself by just saying that's just how I work. And this is how I work. I get much more done. I don't get quite as tired. I get really excited about seeing the progress. Working one block at a time for everything is really a gift to yourself. Now I'm going in here and I'm starting to finish up those pieces. And remember when I cut my backgrounds, I cut them all so I knew how many I had. And so I'm going in here and I'm taking some pieces that I chained together and pulling them apart. Now when I say chain together, if I was doing a queen size quilt, I would never do all of the half square triangles and then chain piece it and then sit and do the cutting apart for half an hour. You want to keep it increments that you still are quite engaged. Now I'm putting my last corners on, those squares on point. I love the way those fit in there perfectly. When I am working with my AccuQuilt cutter, those points fit in so perfect that when I look at where that point is of the triangle point, it matches up there just because I matched the outer corners. That is accurate cutting. So at this point, if you are cutting with AccuQuilt and you're still not getting things to fit together, you know with 95% certainty it's something in how you're sewing. And so today we explored a couple things. We explored an accurate 1/4 inch and stitch length. So look what's happening here as I'm putting those square on points together. I'm finishing up the last of my half square triangles in between, and they're going to come out just about even. And that's fine. So I'm doing the pressing, I'm walking them in, I'm making sure, especially on those last points, on those square on points, that I'm making sure that that bottom edge, as I come off the machine, is lining up where I need it to be. And again, those breaks in between where I'm doing the half square triangles, what I like about those breaks is it breaks up the tedium of doing the other pieces, and it also helps me to get on track. This new little tool is kind of fun to have nearby. I've had a couple of my grandkids take apart things like with that, and it's a pretty safe thing to work with. I wouldn't let them do that unsupervised, but it is safe for them. And they love taking apart a chain of squares or something that I've done. Actually, also, I've let them go with a spool of thread and just cut thread. So give them a spool of thread. They love doing that. Now I'm going to build some of those 4 patches out of the half square triangles, pairing them up with the squares. And so I've sent through a couple of those, and then I'm going back in and picking up another one. Make sure that whenever you're doing this, you always have your pattern nearby so that you can consult it to make sure that your directionality is correct. I'm walking those pieces underneath. I do not, on a block like this, lay everything out in the block and then put it together. I really have gotten over that. If I really am disturbed about something, I'm really good with my seam ripper and I can move it. But truly, to lay every block out usually takes you 4 or 5 times as long to get the block done, because you get so indecisive about, is this the exact right way to put it together? And the person that you're giving to is not going to see that you had 2 oranges next to each other. You will, you always will, and that's just the way it is. Just accept it. So now I'm going ahead. Before I put those right sides together, you noticed I used my point-to-point turner to put that 4 patch together. That way, I'm not going in and creating a bigger bubble in there. Now when I press these, I press them away from the half square triangles and towards the blank squares. That's so I could reduce as much bulk as possible. There is not a one-size-fits-all rule for everything. I do advocate for pressing one direction or the other and not the seams open. And that's because I've seen too many quilts where they've come apart, and when they come apart, there's a hole straight through to the batting. And I've seen this in newer quilts as well as older quilts, of course. That's a garment sewing technique, and this is piecing. And so 95% of the time, I want you pressing your seams one direction or the other. Keep in mind you have batting underneath this that can absorb any bulk that you have in there. Very nice. Now I'm starting to put my units together. Now when I put my units together, I set them off to the side and I looked at them over there before I put everything together just to make sure I didn't have too many oranges together. But honestly, in all those cases, I could have turned them 45 degrees and looked at them. I could have flipped top to bottom pieces because there's 9 full blocks in this. I love the way this turned out. Isn't that a beauty? It was really satisfying, a great test block to start with. Now let's head over and work on the Kona block of the month. We're going to be playing with our colors and going to have fun. This is my favorite part when I start getting ready to do the block out of my fabrics. First off, I want to look through the fabrics that we have for this time. And we have a wide array of deep reds right down to really soft, buttery pinks and shell colored and all sorts of things. So our units that we pick in here, everything that's in this block is half square triangles out of the 3-inch finished half square triangle. And these would be cut out of a 3.5-inch strip with a half square triangle ruler. So when you look at this, the quadrants that we have 6 here in this, and we repeat that 4 times around there. So right there we have 24 half square triangles, and then we have 2 more for the middle, so we have 26. So at least we need to have 13 colors. Well, we can get more than that. So I'm going to get the darkest red out of there, and I'm going to pull this one out, and I need to start getting my pinks. Don't you love playing with fabrics? It's just the best part of it. And I like playing with these littler pieces. And there's 13. So I'm going to be missing some colors, but I think I'm fine with just that collection. Now when I have 13 like this, and I'm going to be using these on these pieces, I can only stack these up in stacks of 6 when I go to cut them. So I'm going to get my 6 here, and then I'm going to get my next 6. And clearly I came up short 1 over here, and so I'm going to take these over to my AccuQuilt. But before I do that, let me show you how you're going to cut it with a specialty ruler. So once again, we're going past that edge so that we can get our 3.5 inches. You cannot get more out of that, but if you like using those little strips, go for it. You know, it's a really, having solid scraps is kind of fun because you can use them. They're double-sided, no big deal. Now if you notice I slipped a little bit there on that piece, and I'm going to go back and check it and see it's fine. So I'm going to go on this side, and I'm going to cut my 90-degree angle. Now when I do this, just like when I'm looking at a fold, I want this so that this line is perpendicular here, and I cut this side off. So what I'm looking at on this ruler is I have little holes in the ruler that show where my lines finish. And so you can see in there that's where my line is for my strips. So the dot from here to here is finished, the dot from here to here, and it keeps it square. 4 fingers on the ruler, 1 off to keep it from pivoting. And yes, I always shut my ruler between cuts. And the reason I do that is that not so much that somebody else is going to get hurt, but I'm going to run my hand into it, and then I'm going to be the one that's going to get cut. Now, when I go to cut these pieces, the thing that I'm looking for here is I want my 3.5 inches up here, and I want my angle that's over here to be squared up. So I've got that lined up right there, and you can see in here that corner makes it at the 3.5 inches. So my first piece that I'm going to cut is here, then I'm going to turn my ruler over, and then I'm going to cut my other 3.5 inch section. On the back, I can see my lines are up there. The K. England's rulers are the only ones that have those on the back, which is great, and there we go. So I've got my 3-inch finished half square triangles. All of those beautiful little half squares, all those pretty pinks cut, we're going to just set those aside, and we're ready to move over to our background fabrics. I am loving the way we're handling the background fabrics. As you can see with these pieces, I have a little bit of fabrics here left over from last ones. These are my quarter square triangles. However, I'm not going to be using them for this one. I'm going to be using them in a future lesson. I'm going to set those aside. This is one cut that I have left over. It's not going to be enough to do everything that I need, but let's go in and study the pieces that we do need. First off, we need this really large, this is that square on point, so it's the piece that's right in here. And this is 4 3/4. Now I'm going to need 4 of them, and I can use them on this piece. However, I'll have a fair amount of waste over here. So what I want to do is I want to do a little bit of math and see if I can make the best use of this some other way. And it appears to me it would be better off to use this wider piece for cutting my squares. So I'm going to go with the smaller squares, and I'll come back and revisit this one in just a moment. And let's get what we need. So out of this whole thing, we're going to need 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 smaller squares. And so I'm going to go ahead and measure them on here, and these are 3.5 inches, which means I'm going to measure this at about 3 3/4 or 4 inches. And I'm looking at the size of this strip, and it's a little bit more. It's almost 8 inches, but not entirely. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this at about the 3 3/4. I'm going to bring those together, and I can fold them up like this and just set them on top of that. So now with those pieces, I'm going to get 8 squares. And so again, I needed 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Actually, I'm only going to get 4 squares out of that one. And then I'm going to go with my 3 3/4 again. And I'm going to need, so there will give me 8. And then I'm going to need a couple more. So I'm just going to cut this full strip here. Now, at this point, I don't want to rely on that folding, because when I fold something, for some reason in my world, I just don't quite get them as squares. So there's 2, 4, and here's 6. So technically what I'm going to be cutting is I'm going to be cutting 12 total. So I want to go in here, and I'm going to trim this down to 3 3/4. So let's talk a little bit about when we are cutting things down this way. Some people are afraid that they're wasting fabric by doing this. I think I waste more fabric by not making that plan. And if you notice, I was able to save more spaces to fit on there. So I've got these two. I'm going to be getting 12 of the squares, so there's my pieces in there. Now, at this point, I've used up all of that one fabric. I now need to cut 4 of the square on points, and then I'm going to need to cut my other pieces. Now, this little piece is too small, so I'm going to keep it over with my scraps. Might use it for something else later on. But now I've gotten my fabric, my big stash of fabric, set up, so all I have to do is scooch this over, and then I'm going to cut these guys. Now, when I cut for these pieces, I'm going to cut this at about, probably a little bit bigger than 5. Now, when I go to subcut these down, it's a 4 3/4 inch piece, and I only need 4 of them. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut them out of these pieces. There's my 5 twice. I'm going to set them up on top of that square, and then I'm going to stack them up on top of my other piece. So now all I have to deal with is how many of these half square triangles do I need. So I need 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So I'm going to go back and look at this piece, and that is pretty cool because they're going to fit on there that way. And so all I have to do is find out how wide I have to cut these pieces. And they're going to be almost 4 inches. So I'm going to need 10. So I'm going to need 5 widths. Do you see how much we're saving by doing it this way? And yes, I do that where I go back and I forget what I was cutting, and I go ahead and redo it. So out of this, I'm going to get 2, 4, 6, 8, and here's my 10. So I have all those pieces on there. Now that's more than I need. I'm actually going to get 12 out of there, but I'll set those aside for later on. So I'm going to go and cut these guys, and then I'm going to start laying them out. These through my cutter, okay? Things out. If you notice on this one, when I did these pieces, I got it really kind of close to that side. And this is the part where when I have multiple stacks in there, if that was folded, they would come unfolded with each other. Here's what I like to do is I like to lay my hand down on the pieces that I'm leaving there, and if for the most part all that's coming off is all four sides around it, I know I made a nice clean cut, which it's going to be a better cut than if I would have done it just my standard cutting. And so those are my scraps. Really not much left over at all. And then plus the fact that if you look at the original pattern, almost everything that they have you doing, they have you starting off with cutting this down into a 4-inch fabric, and then you are drawing a line, sewing on the two sides, opening it up, and trimming them down to 3.5 inch. You not only fabric waste, but it's time waste. So as I go to put these pieces together to go to my sewing machine, I do not lay this whole thing out because, again, the pieces that I'm going to be laying out are the 9 patch. So this is my 9 patch. So we're going to head over to the sewing machine and get sewing. So voila, I'm speeding this up 4 times faster than I actually sewed the whole block. Now that I did my sample block, I'm going to work on my Kona block of the month. And as I'm going in and doing all these pieces, I sat with it until I was done with it. The whole block took me 36 minutes to sew. Now, it doesn't look like 36 minutes because remember I said I sped this video up at 4 times the speed. I am really glad that I stitched this out 1 time before, not so much because I was looking for perfection, but I had more confidence doing this. Now, what am I going to do with all those blocks that I'm doing up out of other pieces? We're teaching our team how to teach a class on how to do zippered throw pillows. They actually go with other quilts. So all of those test blocks that I'm sewing up go with quilts that we've made in the store. And so I'm now going to have throw pillows to go with those. Clever? That's why I think it's important to keep your fabric aside, because you can do that. You could make them bed pillows. But 36 minutes to sew this block together, that's pretty good. If you were going to sew this block, 12 of them, even if you look at that, that's 6 hours of sewing if I was sewing, not at the speed you're watching, because again, it's 4 times the speed of what I actually sewed. But that would be, we're not looking for speed. We're looking for efficiency and building confidence. Even if I had 12 blocks to build of this, I would not sew all the quarter square triangles and then try to figure it out. That's really where you actually lose a lot of time. And again, it goes back to that distractibility. There is nothing wrong with that. You just need to use the skills to honor you need to use the intellect to honor the skills that you have. Those are super skills. If you don't have business cards made for yourself, maybe I'd put like a line underneath your name that says, happily distracted and sewing my days away. Just honor who you are. And it's so much happier. This one, a lot of times, like if I have just a little bit of time in between other projects, maybe I'm, doing laundry and I'm planning on leaving, I will go to my sewing room and I will sew for just maybe 45 minutes. And this is the sort of thing that you want to be doing. How satisfying if I'm off to a really busy day and I get a block done. And I keep it usually right nearby. In fact, I'll even keep it under the needle in the machine to remind myself, how I get to spend my time when I choose to spend my time that way. Now, when I work on things like at home, like let's say I'm making dinner or things like this, I still sew in between, friends. It would be kind of like if you went and picked up a crossword puzzle. You are putting things together and you get to do that. Sometimes we have a lot of grandkids, and sometimes when the noise gets to me, I'll just slip away to my sewing room. Usually a grandlove will come down and hang out with me, and I'll give them a stack of triangles to hand to me. And that's really, really important to do, because what you want to do is you want to bring them into your world of sewing too. And I think that's important. That's really where a lot of us started at some point. Somebody allowed us to respect our creativity. Cut them up a bunch of triangles and get them a flannel board. Let them play with you. And that is not just little kids, by the way. Older kids like doing this too. So bring other people into your creative world. Think of how you started. You might be self-taught. Look at this. This is a new seam ripper. I love that. And then what I do with that is I'll go back and clean it up. I had a little thread breakage there. And I do clean it up at that point so I don't have to mess with it later on. There we go. Keep on going. Isn't this fun? Isn't it fun to watch somebody else sew too? Yes, I do have a tailor's awl nearby me all the time. I just found my by Annie's tailor's awl, and it was in with the Legos. Somebody had used it to be taking them apart, so maybe we should have Annie put that on the label. Good for taking Legos apart. So this is my Clover stiletto. It's one, our tailor's awl. It's one that I had a lot longer. Is my first one that I had. And I'm going in here and I'm doing all my pressing at the same time. Look at that. Isn't that just so satisfying? Like I said, give a little kid that thread cutter and give them a spool of thread and let them go to town. Yeah, it's going to be messy, but whatever. So this is the block. I gave you all the layouts for the blocks. This is the way I chose to do mine, and that's putting it together with the square on point along with the little bow ties that are put together. So that's how I chose to put it. In the instructions, I gave you all of the instructions that show the different versions of how you could put it together. How you could put it together with flying geese. How you could put it together with the original way they had it done was entirely with squares and half square triangles. I probably would never do that. I try to avoid that, especially since I've moved over to AccuQuilt. I try to keep my background fabrics, especially in whole pieces, even if they're solid. And that's why a lot of times when you look at the pictures that came with your kit, you do not see all those little seams because the background they used in is white or black. And so you don't see that. So on the bottom of the page, you'll see all three versions of how you could do it. You choose what you want to do. Hopefully, you are learning more about yourself. You're enjoying the creative process with all this, and that we are helping you to learn more about yourself along with helping you be inspired to sew more. I want to thank the very many of you who have been referring us to your friends for education. We are working very hard to get more programming out there for you, especially virtual programming. But we thank you for your support because that's how we keep a team so that we can keep those of us who do teaching freed up to be able to inspire you to sew more and more and more. And remember, you learn as much with your hands as you do with your head, and your heart informs it all. So thanks for being inspired to sew with me. I look forward to seeing what you've created with this. Share it on over at Friends Who Inspired to Sew. Thanks so much.